All right, guys, I'm here with Joe Schmid from Majesty of Reason. So, Joe, if you could just take a moment to introduce yourself, give a little background.
Yeah, I'm excited for this because I love talking about agnosticism and things like that, and I love talking about philosophy of religion. So yeah, like you said, I'm Joe. I do both popular and scholarly level work in philosophy. So on the popular level, I have my YouTube channel called Majesty of Reason. There I have lectures of my own that I make on various topics in philosophy of religion and metaphysics and philosophy of time. And I also have other philosophers come on to discuss with one another and with me to discuss their work mainly. And then also on the popular level, I have my blog, which was formerly at majestyofreason.wordpress.com, which is now at my new website, which is josephschmid.com. So that's fun and fancy. And then on the scholarly level, I have my book, which is available on Amazon, which is also right there, Majesty of Reason, a short guide to critical thinking and philosophy. And I also write papers and books and whatnot and submit them to scholarly journals. And so if anyone wants to look at my professional research, they can go to my website, josephschmid.com.
Great, man. Great introduction. Yeah, I saw some of your dialogue with Phaser. And when I saw that he wrote you back, I was like, wow, okay. We got to pay attention to Joe here, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was that
man.
was that was an interesting dialogue.
Yeah,
I
for
think it was
sure.
fruitful as well because well, anyway, I think a lot of people came out of it having a better understanding of a lot of the criticisms of Phaser's proofs. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely, man. All right, so let's get right into it. We're just going to discuss agnosticism. So the first question is, what is agnosticism? So, I hear a lot of people say, I'm 50-50. I don't know. I'm right in the middle. But it seems to me like it's this kind of, at least academically speaking, and philosophically speaking, this suspension of judgment towards the God proposition. So if
Yeah.
you want to kind of just, expand
Yeah.
upon that, or give your own definition.
Yeah. So for like any proposition or claim, right? So statements of the form, just statements that have a declarative sentence with meaning, right? So grass is green, or God exists, or there are horses. We could take various attitudes toward them. So one attitude we could take toward a given proposition is believing it. You're saying, yeah, that is the case. I'm representing the world as being that way. So for instance, if someone says that grass is green, what I'm going to say is my attitude towards that proposition is I believe it. I believe that that's true. You can also take a different attitude, which is we can call it disbelief or belief in the negation. So that's just saying, actually, no, I think that that's false. I represent the world as being the opposite of that, essentially. So if someone says that grass is white, I'm going to say, no, that's false. I believe that that is false. But there are some propositions for which we take neither of these stances, and instead for which we suspend judgment. So if
Mm-hmm.
someone says that the number of stars that exist, just the number of stars, is even, okay, I'm gonna say I don't know if it's even or if it's odd, like it's one of those two, but I don't know which. So I'm just gonna suspend judgment on that proposition. I'm not gonna believe it's true. I'm also
Mm-hmm.
not gonna believe it's false. I'm just gonna suspend judgment. And so it's that kind of suspending judgment, as you pointed out, which is characteristic of agnosticism. Now,
Okay.
agnosticism is always indexed toward a particular proposition, right? So typically when you hear it, people are talking about the main agnosticism, which is towards God's existence.
Right.
But you can take that towards any position whatsoever. Someone might be an agnostic about the ontology of time. So what times exist? They might be agnostic about the evenness or oddness of the stars, which I think we all should be probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, anyway, that's generally what agnosticism is. It's indexed to a particular proposition. And in the case that we are speaking of here, it's going to be indexed to the proposition that God exists. And so
Okay.
God is going to be something like an ultimate, necessarily existent creator of everything else that's perfect, all knowing, and all good and all powerful. Basically, that's the basic idea. And
Okay.
so agnostics are going to say they're going to suspend judgment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are different kinds of agnostics. So I do want to go through these because they're
Yeah. It's
important for
important.
people to
Yeah.
understand.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them is what I will call an in principle agnostic. And this is just my terminology. I find it really helpful. So if people want to look this up, I don't think they'll find it anywhere. So I just think it's helpful for conceptually divvying up the terrain.
Right. Right.
So an in principle agnostic says that it's not possible to know whether or not God exists. It's
Mm.
like you might believe that God exists, you might disbelieve it, you might take all variety of stances, but you just cannot know. And arguably can't, so these people say, cannot even have a strongly justified belief one way or the other. Perhaps the proposition just by nature is beyond our cognitive faculties. God, if he existed, would be so transcendent that we wouldn't really understand. So that's a kind of in principle agnostic. They make the positive claim that like you can't know that God exists and you can't strongly justifiably believe it either. So that's an in principle agnostic. And then there are two other kinds of agnostics that make use of this notion, which is pretty big in philosophy, of credences. So we could distinguish between credences and beliefs. Okay, so a belief is like an on or off switch. You either believe something or you don't believe it. But a credence is like your level of confidence in something. You might be 100% confident in something. You might only be 90% confident in something, even though you believe it in both cases, say. So if, for instance, I'm checking my weather and it says that there's a 90% chance of rain tomorrow, I'm going to have a credence or a confidence level that it's going to rain tomorrow. I'm going to have a credence level of 90% in that. But if I check tomorrow morning and it goes down to 85%, well, then I'm going to change my credence level. I'm still going to believe it's going to rain because that's a pretty high probability. But I'm going to change my credence level to be like 85%, say. So it's like a level of confidence, essentially. And so these next two kinds of agnostics make use of that notion. So one of them is what I fall into. It's what I call an epistemic agnostic, which says that given the reasons and the evidence that they have considered, that the person has considered, their credence in the proposition that God exists is, something like roughly counterbalanced. So maybe they'd say it's 50-50. Maybe they don't want to assign a precise one. I myself, I don't want to assign a precise thing because like, I don't know. It's a bit difficult given the huge complexity of the evidence and so on. But I would say the reasons in my mind that favor theism and favor atheism roughly counterbalance. And so I would kind of cash that out in terms of credence. Okay. So that's an epistemic agnostic. I still say it's possible to have a strongly justified belief either way. But given what I've looked into, I don't have that, and I don't think that's warranted given my evidence. And then the final kind of agnostic, again, making use of this notion of credences, is what I call just I think I called it a suspension agnostic before, which is kind of odd because all agnostics suspend belief, but this one is suspending assigning a credence. So it's a suspension agnostic. They're like, whereas I would say the evidence is roughly counterbalanced, the suspension agnostic, like, it's just like, well, it might be between 0 and 100, but I'm not going to say it's near 50-50. I'm not going to say the evidence is roughly counterbalanced. I mean, maybe some people have a justified belief, but I'm not even going to assign a credence. Like, it's like they're like throwing up their hands. It's like, I'm not even going to assign a credence anywhere here. I just don't know. They're like, that's like a super big, I don't know, all caps, I don't know. So, anyway, that's a kind of conceptual terrain of the different kinds of agnosticism. And then one final distinction before I turn it back to you.
Oh, go for it. Take your time,
this final distinction is between agnostics who are agnostic towards a position because they don't have strong reasons on either side versus agnostics on a position because they have very good reason on both sides. Okay, so some people might not have considered a particular view all that much, and so they don't really have reasons on either side, and so they kind of remain agnostic on the basis of that. Other people might consider that same proposition and have lots of good reasons for thinking it's true, but also lots of good reasons for thinking it's false. And because of that, they suspend judgment on it. Now, I fall into that latter camp with respect to God's existence. I think that there are lots of good reasons for and actually lots of good reasons against. And so that's another distinction that's crucial. And like, remember the Star case, right? I actually fall into that first camp. Like, I don't have any reason whatsoever to think it's one way or the other. So that's why I'm agnostic on that one. So anyway, I hope that these give people tools to think critically about what agnosticism is, because a lot of these are just blurred when people talk about agnosticism. Some people are like, you think it's impossible to know? Well, it's like, no, I never said that. It's like, oh, well, you don't even assign a credence. It's like, no, I didn't say that. Like,
or they'll just say, oh, I don't know. I'm just in the middle, there's a lot more to it. And
or people will be like, oh, so you don't have a reason either way? I'm like, no.
Yeah, that's great, man. That was a really great explanation. Thanks for unpacking all of that. I appreciate it. So question 2, why not just be an atheist or a theist? Why agnostic? See, I mean, you kind of touched upon that, but I kind of want to press more on how you yourself say there is good evidence for God's existence. And then there's also good evidence against God's existence. Right. So why not just kind of put faith in one of those, those two pieces of evidence and just say, hey, I'm a theist or I'm an atheist. I just think it's more probable. So I'm going to lean in that direction because ultimately it is either true or false that God exists. Right. I mean, things like or answers like I don't know, I don't care to know, it's
Mhm.
impossible to know, don't really address that proposition, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah.
because it is true or false.
Yeah.
So what do you think
Yeah.
about
No,
that?
that's a good question. So one thing to say here is that we all have different experiences and evidence bases, right? So we all have this unique concoction of factors that go into not only explaining why we believe the things that we do, but also justifying why we accept the things that we do. And so we each have unique concoctions of experience, personal experience, bodies of testimonial evidence. If you think about it, our testimonial evidence is the main way that we know things. You read something in a
Yeah.
textbook, you didn't perform those experiments. You read in a textbook, like, how do you know that hydrogen exists? About 99.9% of your listeners
Yeah.
take that essentially on the testimony of scientists and
Of
so on.
scientists, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So most of our knowledge actually comes from testimonial evidence, and we all have read different things and so on, and so have different testimonial evidences. We also have different probability or plausibility structures. We find different certain things intuitive or seem really plausible to us given our background and so on. And we've all read different books, watched different YouTube lectures and other sorts of things, had different life experiences. All that comes together to have this kind of unique concoction of factors that kind of makes each of us uniquely situated on what I call an epistemic landscape, which is a landscape of different views and justifications and so on. And so I take this on a kind of individual by individual basis, right? So why is one person an atheist or theist? That's going to depend on their particular evidence base and where they are located on the grand
Mhm.
epistemic landscape.
Right,
So I
right.
can only answer this for myself, which is what I'm going to do. And so for me, why not be an atheist or theist? Well, because I don't think that the reasons sufficiently or adequately support being one as opposed to the other. I think
Mhm.
that the reasons roughly counterbalance one another.
Right.
And I mean, given that I do have some reasons for one side, you ask, like, well, why not just go with that side, right? What I want to say is that as philosophers, as human beings, I think we should love and almost adore truth. Really, we should be focusing on what's true. We should
Absolutely.
believe what's true. We
Mhm.
should love what's true, and we should proportion our beliefs to what we think is justifiably true, like what we could justify as true, and so on. So, and the justification and evidence and so on, that's the way that we get to truth and reasons and so on. That's how we reason to things and come to accept them as true. And so what I want to say is that given this value of truth, I think that truth is intrinsically valuable, and I think we should all really value it. I don't want to go where my evidence doesn't lead me. I want to stay close to what my evidence and what my reasoning is telling me is the best position to take. And so if my evidence and my reasoning tells me that the evidence is roughly counterbalanced, I'm not going to privilege one over the other, because to
Mm.
me that seems like it's violating what I don't know, my commitment to truth. My commitment to truth gives me a commitment to reason and evidence and so on. And given my commitment to reason and evidence and so on, which is my best guide to truth, that tells me that it's roughly counterbalanced. And so to adopt a position which is not counterbalanced seems to me to be going against that commitment, which I just think is a fundamental commitment. I just think it's self-evident that we should value truth and so on, and
Right.
evidence
That's
and reason.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not here to. I mean, there is certainly room for non-evidential considerations, like practical considerations. There's a huge debate about Pascal's wager, for
Yeah.
instance. There's
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff here that I'm glossing over. So for the audience, I don't want to say that, like, it's irrational to take Pascal's wager or anything like that.
For sure.
I'm setting those considerations aside and just explaining my own position. For myself, I like these kind of epistemic reasons for belief, and I focus on that. I've actually had Liz Jackson on my channel to discuss Pascal's wager.
Same
It was
here.
super
Yeah.
fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
She's
And
great.
so
Yeah.
she's so awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I advise people to check out that video that I had with her, because I talk about different kind of dispositions that people have and how those can influence how they interact with Pascal's wager. And I have a kind of, as I just kind of explained, I have a kind of what I call an epistemic, a more epistemic disposition than a practical one.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that leads me to really value the kind of where the evidence and the reasons and so on, rather than the practical considerations take me. But anyway, that's getting ahead of myself. But I hope that sufficiently answers the question.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That was great. Okay, let's see here. Question 3. This goes into epistemology. What do agnostics think about the extent of human knowledge? Right. So like we kind of already said, some agnostics will say, no, you cannot know, or it's impossible to know. Right. So they're making a knowledge claim themselves. They are saying
Mhm.
human reason cannot penetrate the nature of God, or we can't know any of that. We can know this stuff over here, all kinds of scientific truths where we already presuppose them. But over here, we can't know any of that. Our access is just completely shut off. What would you say to that?
Yeah. So just in general, like I was pointing out, it's probably going to depend on which agnostic that we're talking about. So like
Exactly. Yeah.
some of them will have a view where there's a pretty limited extent of human knowledge. It might be limited to, I don't know, maybe mathematics and science or something like that. Or
Yeah. Yeah.
others might have a more expansive view. But as you pointed out, the kind of what we're targeting here is the kinds of agnostics that are making this in principle claim. Like it's in principle impossible to have like a strongly justified belief, and that's kind of out in God's existence, and that's or in the absence of God, and that's outside the extent of human knowledge. And so what I would say to such people is, well, firstly, I'm going to need some sort of reason to believe that. So if you want to convince me to believe that we just can't know something.
Yeah. Why can't
that
we
seems
know?
to be that seems to be a pretty strong claim. Like
it is, and a lot of times, yeah, right. They'll assert that with profound confidence.
Yeah.
But they're not really giving me any reason to distrust my cognitive faculties, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's difficult. Like one problem that they might face is that, well, if we're so epistemically in the dark in this one domain, what makes you think that we're not epistemically in the dark about a whole host of other domains? Like, why can't we reason about like and come to justified conclusions about God's existence? So that's one thing I would push them on. I'd ask them, because different individuals would say different things.
Yeah.
I'd ask them, why do you think that, right? Why do you think that God's existence, whether his existence or non-existence, why is that outside the powers of human reason and our ability to have strongly justified beliefs and even knowledge?
Yeah.
So one thing I'd say is I'd ask them. Now, I guess, well, some people that I've come across who are these kinds of in principle agnostics, just in my personal experience, what I found that a lot of them say is that, oh, well, were God to exist? Like these questions are about something that's so transcendent, like just infinite and so on, that given that kind of transcendence, it just seems intuitively to be well beyond our cognitive reach, as it were. And I mean, I guess what I'd say to that is, I mean, this itself is relying on a kind of principle. I mean, this itself, it's kind of self-defeating, right? Because what you're saying is, oh, well, you have sufficient access to this realm so as to know that we can't know anything about it.
Exactly.
But like,
good point.
Your very justification for that was saying that, oh, well, it would be so transcendent or so infinite that we can't really know about. But it's like, you just looked at this nature, the nature of the thing in question, were it to exist, and you reasoned about its nature in such a way to come to a conclusion about it. And it's like, that's exactly what we're doing in the case of reasoning for or against God's existence. So it's like, they themselves need to presuppose some kind of epistemic access to this domain in order to claim that we don't have epistemic access to them
to even say that. Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly. Like, so you don't know.
Exactly. There's
how do you know that? Right.
Yeah, there's a worry of self-defeat there. So I'd first ask them for their justification. But secondly, I'd probably push on this self-defeat worry. But also, but a third thing that I do, I just want to say quickly.
Go for it. Yeah, man. Go for it.
The third thing that I do is I'd give them paradigm examples of knowledge in other domains. And I'd say, hey, we're doing exactly the same kind of thing in the domain of philosophy of religion with respect to God's existence or non-existence, right? We build certain theories. We look at their simplicity, their explanatory power, how well they explain and predict the data. This is exactly what scientists do, and we're just applying this in another domain. And so if you're saying that we can't come to knowledge in this other domain, it would seem as though you'd have to say, oh, we can't come to knowledge in like science and so on. And I'd say that's false.
Absolutely.
So I point out the methodology and just like how do they have mathematical knowledge? Well, they just see that 1 + 1 = 2.
Right.
But similarly,
or logic, how do they use logic?
Yeah, logic, exactly. But like similarly in domains of philosophy of religion and so on, like you appeal to these kinds of, well, I can just see that such and such is the case, and because of that I combine it with certain other premises to arrive at this conclusion. So like that's exactly what we're doing in this other domain. So those are that's my tripartite response to this kind of person.
Yeah, for sure. And Phaser makes a point too where he says there either has to be explanations all the way down, or there are no explanations at all. So how can there be explanations over here, but over here there's no explanations? He uses the example of it's like being a little bit pregnant. You can't say, well, I'm a little pregnant. You either are or you're not. And of course that ties in with the PSR and whatnot. But that's a really interesting stuff there. Did you have anything else to add on to that, or do you want to move on to the next
I think that's good. I think that I'd follow that tripartite response, and I'd advise other people to follow it as well.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I actually wanted to add one more thing to that intuition you brought up. I do think people will say that, they'll say, no, we just can't know, because we're thinking of something so big, like the cosmos and whether a God exists, and you know, um, how did he do this? What does it mean for God to just be being itself, right? So it is intuitively natural, maybe, to say, well, we can't know this. There's no way. But once you
Mhm.
unpack it, a little bit more, that claim kind of is
Well, yeah,
self-defeating in a sense, like you said.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I mean, I guess also I want to say is like, think about the atheistic case as well. Like, to make it, one way to go about making a case for atheism is to look at a purported conception of God and try to tease out contradictions. And like, what are people saying, that we can't look at concepts and tease out contradictions in them? Are they saying that there could be a true contradiction? Like let's suppose that someone could find a particular contradiction in a particular conception of God. Well, then we can justifiably believe and indeed know that there is no such being as that particular conception has it, right?
Hmm.
Because it entails a contradiction.
Hmm.
It's an incoherent concept. And so like, it's not as though, like, all we need is a sufficient grasp of certain concepts, and at least for certain particular like models and so on, if we can demonstrate that there are contradictions in there, and that's of course a hugely controversial topic on its own, but if you can, then that's yet another way to come to knowledge of the opposite conclusion, that there is no such thing as such and such. So
Yeah,
like, there's nothing inherently problematic about that, or like super duper beyond our can, or things like that. So anyway, that's another thing that I wanted to say.
definitely. Yeah. And I think it's unhelpful to just, always say, well, I don't know. Or I've talked to agnostics as they define themselves, and they just say, well, you don't know. 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 I just push back and say we're ultimately trying to argue to the best possible explanation
Mhm.
of all there is. And if that's theism, atheism, or agnosticism, well, that's great. But provide reasons for
Yeah.
your convictions. Just don't keep asserting that you don't know. You don't know. It's
Yeah,
just
and be sure,
unhelpful.
yeah,
Yeah,
and be careful not to bleed your skepticism into other domains, because if you're saying, yeah,
absolutely.
you don't know, you don't know, like,
Yeah,
you could play that game with the
all
scientists as
day.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You could play that all day. Um, okay, question 4, Joe. Do you think it's more probable that God exists or does not exist, given all the evidence you have, your agnosticism? If you were to, you know, if I were to hold a gun right to you and you had to answer, what would you say? What do you think is
That's
more probable?
It's funny because I've told people that if they were to hold a gun to me and tell me the answer,
Yeah.
I'd say, oh, I still wouldn't answer. I told them that.
Nice.
Um, but
You are holding true to your agnosticism, man.
yeah, like
I credit you
basically,
for
so
that.
like, yeah, that's essentially, I mean, that's probably what I would do. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's fair.
I don't know.
I
I
mean,
mean, like, listen, I could talk about my desires, right? So like, I would want there to be a perfect supreme being that is perfectly sovereign and provident over creation. I want things to be ultimately good. I want
me
this
too.
world
Yeah.
ultimately to be redeemed. I
Hmm.
want ultimately, I want these sort of things. I think it accords with certain desires. I think it would be a good
Absolutely.
thing were they to be true. And so I don't know, if someone were to hold a gun up to my head and say that, I'd probably go with what I think would be a good thing. And so I'd probably just say theism. I'd probably just do
Yeah.
that because
That's
I see it as desirable. I think there are certain elements of this worldview and so on that are good. And so I mean, people, there's this debate in philosophy of religion between pro-theists and anti-theists and
yeah.
so on. And
Hmm.
that's actually a super interesting debate. And there's
Yeah.
like really good work on like both sides of the debate.
Hmm.
But I myself do fall down on the pro-theist side of the debate,
I
which
think
is,
so too. Yeah.
were
I
God to
definitely do.
exist, yeah, were God to exist, things would be better, all things considered. Um, I'm not like a staunch one. I think that there are certain respects in which it wouldn't be better, but all
Mhm.
things considered, I think
Right.
reality as a whole, as it were, would be better.
For sure. Yeah.
And so, given that pro-theism commitment of mine, I'd probably, if there was a gun to my head, I'd probably just say theism. So
Yeah. 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 That's what Ben Watkins said as well. I had him on my channel. You're familiar with him, right? The atheist
yeah, yeah,
philosopher. And he said towards the end of the interview, I can't understand why people wouldn't want there to be a God. I
yeah.
mean, why would you not want that to happen? Of course, maybe there are some reasons that we could unpack, but all in all, I think
Mhm,
it's better for there to be an ultimate arbiter of the cosmos that
mhm.
wants us to participate in this and willed for us to participate. Right. So,
Yeah, and which will redeem
yeah,
everything. Will
which
make
will redeem
things make
this.
things good in
Yeah,
the end. Yeah.
exactly. Right. Right.
I mean, I just wonder, do they have a mistaken conception of God, right? Like, how could
Perhaps.
how
Yeah.
could anyway, yeah, like you, I'm a protheist, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Because there's certain people, I think, like Dan Barker.
Yeah.
And maybe Thomas Nagel, who have flat out said, I don't want there to be a God. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
Nagel said, I do not want, um, life to be that way. I
Mhm.
don't want the universe to be that way. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would like to sit down with him and ask him about like which conception of God, like because there are different
Yeah.
conceptions.
There
He
are.
might be thinking of this kind of cosmic tyrant, as it were.
Maybe he
And
is. Yeah.
if he has this kind of conception of God, right, I want to be in union with him, right? Like I wouldn't want to exist in that world with
Uh,
this particular cosmic tyrant, right?
Neither would I.
What
Yeah.
I want,
Because what would
I mean,
happen if that
yeah,
cosmic tyranny went on for eternity?
yeah, exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
would you want to be a part of that? I wouldn't.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, if we're talking about this ultimate perfect being, which is making
Yeah,
everything good in the end, but then yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so question 5. What evidence would ultimately move an agnostic to theism? And I guess I'm asking you directly
Yeah.
because we can, there's all kinds of different agnosticisms out there. Excuse me.
Yeah. So I guess okay, so I can give a few like sufficient conditions. So like one way would be to as I said, I had a variety of different reasons in favor of, let's say, naturalism,
Mhm.
and a variety of different reasons in favor of theism. Now, one thing that could happen is we could add to the list of strong reasons for theism, such that it counterbalances, at least sufficiently counterbalances this one, so that I could call myself a tentative theist. That's one thing that could happen. So add to the theistic stock. Another thing that could happen is take the existing reasons that I have in the theistic stock, and I find them much more plausible than I do now. So like, even though I think that they are reasons, they have different weights for me. And so maybe some of them get ratcheted up in their weight, maybe I, certain objections that like nag at my mind to some of them, go away. And so like the weight of some of the reasons that I already have are going to be strengthened for the theist side. So that's
Mhm.
what could ultimately move an agnostic of my kind of theism.
Okay.
And also, I mean, another way that you could have that is either removing reasons on that I have on the naturalist side, or diminishing their weight, right? So there's a kind of symmetry there. You could either add reasons to this side for the theist camp, or you could take the reasons that there are and increase their weight for me, or you could remove reasons from the naturalist side and decrease or decrease their weight.
Yeah.
So I guess that's really what I'd say on that side. I mean, I'm also open in principle to a more experiential ways that could potentially move me. Like if I had some kind of I guess religious experience,
Hmm.
and I I could convince myself to get over objections to like religious experience type arguments and so on, like
Yeah.
um because they're disagreement and like debunking explanations and so on. But if I could set those aside and have an experience, that could also be something that moves me. I could
Yeah.
see that,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
difficult because we're like working in like what would happen were such and such to obtain, and ultimately we'd have to see if it genuinely happened to see what would be the case.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Um, okay. So question 6. This is actually the last question here. What evidence would ultimately move an agnostic to atheism? I mean, it's probably a lot of the same things just flipped around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It would be flipped around. So
Right.
the for the natural side, you'd either add reasons to that or strengthen the weight of the existing reasons, or for the theist side, you take away reasons from that or decrease the weight of the reasons that are already there.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I mean, could there be experiential evidence on that side? I think there might be able to be. Like if someone experiences um, such a poignant evil that they they just have this distinctive sense that it's intrinsically impermissible for anyone to allow such a horrendous evil to obtain. Um, that might be one way to have a kind of irreligious experience, as it were. So I guess
Yep.
that's potentially open on that side as well. Um, but yeah, that's what I'd say there. And I mean, again, I want to stress that in general, like these are going to be different for different people, given our dispositions and the variety of concoction of factors, as I was talking about, that goes into
Yeah.
explaining what we
Absolutely.
believe,
Yeah.
and also justifying what we believe. So
Right.
I don't want to give the audience the impression, of course, that I'm sort of imposing my particular ways of going about this on others. So
For sure. Yeah. Okay. So that's it. That was a great discussion. And I do want to ask one final question. Who are some of your favorite philosophers? Got to ask.
uh,
Yeah. Before we
yeah,
go.
yeah. So um, I've been starting to realize that some of the best aspects of philosophers are how generous they are with their time, how loving and truth-seeking they are,
Yeah.
and I don't know, just the more like the virtuous side of things. That are they willing to really kind of grapple with the issues, seek the truth, and not kind of just defend a pre-existent tribe and erect barriers and so on, and just try to give people ammo for fighting another tribe. So I've come to see these things as just utterly central to being a good philosopher. It's the more kind of character aspects of it. I mean, of course, your work matters and it has to be quality work, but like more important than that is, do you have the dispositions of a philosopher?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm going to say like Josh Rasmussen is probably up there as my favorite.
He's great.
I remember back when I was
Yeah.
in high school. So I'm in my third year of college. I'm actually graduating this year. So this upcoming May, I am graduating.
Congrats.
And yeah, thank you. And back in high school, I think I was like a junior, maybe even a sophomore, but I reached out to Josh Rasmussen because I watched one of his YouTube videos and I was like, hey, I have some objections to this. So I'd love to converse with this guy. Who is this guy behind his YouTube channel?
Yeah.
And so, this is when Josh like had never gone on Capturing Christianity or anything like that. Like he was a node. He just had like,
he wasn't known. Yeah.
Yeah. He was just at a YouTube channel. It was like, maybe like, I don't remember how many it was, but it was probably like 800 subscribers or something like that. I don't even remember.
Wow.
But yeah, I was this little bright-eyed sophomore or junior, and I reached out to him and I'm like, hey, I have some objections. And he was so generous with his time. He sent me a preprint PDF of like a book that he was working on that like touched on some of my objections. And we just went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that blossomed over the years. And
Wow.
he's just been so generous and so truth-oriented. You can tell that he's not trying to defend a pre-existent tribe. When he's giving theistic arguments, he is not trying to bolster the faith of theists and try to defend against the attacks of atheists. He's trying, he's trying to seek the truth, whether that truth leads him to atheism or not, whether that truth is ultimately beautiful or ultimately ugly. He doesn't care. He's wanting the truth of the matter. And so I find the character elements of this the most important. And for that reason, I go with probably Josh as my absolute favorite.
Wow,
but,
great.
Up there on the theist side are people like Alexander Proust. I really like his work. His work has had a big influence on me. So, yeah, I'm just going to stick with those two. And then on the atheist side, I really like all my professors as well. They are all so great that I've had, but I won't go through all of them. Then on the atheist side, Paul Draper, one of my professors that I've had, and
wow, really?
So yeah, he is so smart. He is so kind. He is such a lovely human being. Oh my goodness. But I've had philosophy of religion courses with him, and he's just he's so great. So him, definitely Alex Malpass. He is scary smart. He's so great. And Graham Oppie, they're all so generous with their time. You send them emails and I don't know, they've all had a big impact on me and they're all so truth oriented, which is what I love. Anyway, I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah, that's great. No, I really love that onus on the character.
Yeah.
Because I've conversed with just really anyone, and they don't really want to give you their time at all and maybe a little bit stuck up. And if we're really to seek truth and orient our will towards that, we have to be loving and give our time to people. And we should want to engage with this. We should want to do this.
Yeah. I mean, like one thing that I want to say is like, for some of these people, it's, I don't know, it's totally understandable on some level that, you have an academic, right? They are, 40, 50, something like that years old, right?
Yeah.
They have a family that they have to take care of. They might be, they have classes going on. They're grading things. They might have certain health problems of their own that they're going through. They have to like pay their mortgage and other sorts of things that they're worrying about. So they've got all these obligations on their plate, right? And so, if someone just reaches out to them and they have like a 4-paragraph email and this guy's got 15 other emails that he's got to go through, some of them are from their department head and other sorts of things.
Right.
If that's the case, I think it's totally understandable for, some of these people to be like, sorry, I don't have the time.
Absolutely.
And, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to, but I don't know what sets some people apart is that it's just this super erogatory virtue. They go out of their way to make time for the people that ask them. And like that can change lives, right? Like Josh Rasmussen changed my life in that sort of regard.
Right.
And so it's like, I don't know. I just think like, what if Josh, I was just thinking the other day and I was telling Josh this, like, what if, Josh did something that was well within his rights and that would have been perfectly consistent with his being virtuous, right? what if he just said, sorry, Joe, I don't have the time. I appreciate your questions, but I'm working on a book and I've got a family and I've got academics and so on. I just wonder what he would, if he would have said that,
What
how
would
my
have
life would have,
happened? Yeah,
how
it
my
could
life
have
would have
gone
been
a
different.
completely different
I
direction, man.
might not have eventually made Majesty of Reason. I
Yeah,
might not have eventually pursued philosophy as a degree, because I was something I was debating between philosophy and biology. Like, so many different things could have happened. So I just, that kind of supererogatory aspect can change lives. And
absolutely, man.
and
Yeah,
so yeah, it's something that I want to try to seek in myself.
yeah,
And you know, I'm not always able to do that, because you know, you get so many requests and some of them you just have to turn down.
exactly.
But like, I
Yeah,
think that's such a good character aspect that I've learned from Josh, and I want to seek to emulate it. So anyway.
absolutely, man. Well, Joe, this was great. I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, man. Take care.